Well, during the negotiations about ending Russia's war against Ukraine, which took place just recently in Washington between Trump-Zelensky and the European allies, this phrase territorial exchange came up again. In this episode, let's review who has commented on this topic in the past 24 hours. So where exactly is that red line? Because Ukraine says there will be no territorial concessions. Although in the past 24 hours, there have already been hints that if it's an equal exchange, whatever that might mean regarding territories, then Ukraine might agree to some territorial concessions. De facto, but not de jure. Again, more details have emerged here after the negotiations in Washington over the past days, so now there is something to discuss. I'm Alexei Pechi. Today is August 19th. We'll go through everything step by step. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. Leave a like, write any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. So, Donald Trump, let me remind you, before the start of the multilateral meeting at the White House with European leaders, said, "We also need to discuss possible territorial exchanges, taking into account the current front line." This was a direct statement, not a rumor or insider info. The President of the United States clearly states that the subject of the peace agreement negotiations will be precisely the issue of territorial exchange. Today, Trump said Ukraine will regain some territory, stating, "We'll try to return as much as possible, but Kyiv must also make concessions." And further, I'll give you another quote from Trump. "A ceasefire is not necessary for negotiations to end the war." And immediately another part of the same quote. They have very good protection. That is, territorial exchanges and this protection are essentially now being combined into one package, where a ceasefire is no longer a mandatory first step. That is, if Trump previously said himself that first there should be a ceasefire as a gesture of good faith and then any negotiations, now Trump says that basically there is no need for a ceasefire in order to make a deal. The outline of Russia's demands. It has already been put together by several media outlets, so now I'll try to give you the overall picture. Sky News reminds us that at the Alaska meeting, Putin offered to take control of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions as a condition for ending the war. The idea of an exchange on other parts of the front was discussed. This correlates with earlier statements by Trump, who said there would be some exchange of territories. Kyiv's position over the past day has been quite clear. It is not changing immediately. This is an extremely restrained public position, but with clear emphasis. Because Zelensky clearly stated that security guarantees will be formalized on paper within 7 to 10 days regarding the territories. On camera, he avoids direct formulas but makes it clear that sensitive issues are a matter for his personal conversation with Putin, not statements for the press. In connection with this, there's the earlier statement from Zelensky that Russia can only be forced to peace by force, meaning a live exchange is not considered peace. The Europeans, for their part, have drawn such a red line. And it has been repeatedly stated in Washington that a ceasefire is expected, at least by next week. No legitimizing aggression. These are the first conditions for starting any real negotiations. This is also seen in Ursula von der Leyen's formula, called the equivalent of Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which does not mention territory in exchange for guarantees. That is, there is not a word in the European formulation that Ukraine must give up territory in exchange for Europeans and Americans giving us security guarantees. There is an automatic response. So, the Europeans are now insisting that, listen, okay, Trump doesn't want a ceasefire, but Trump is demanding a territorial exchange. The Europeans are saying, listen, there should be no territorial exchange, because no border should be violated or revised by force. Now, the Europeans are relaxing on this territorial issue and saying, okay, let's focus on security guarantees, but they must clearly specify the automatic mechanism for triggering these guarantees. That is, what exactly Russia has to do and how the Western countries should respond. Keir Starmer emphasized that the consequences for Russia for violating any peace agreement must be clearly defined. And this, together, puts up a barrier to this exchange of territories as a price for security guarantees. What are Western media generally writing today? For example, Reuters writes that European leaders are pushing Trump toward a ceasefire before any deals. Trump said that the United States will help Europe ensure Ukraine's security, but Putin's aide Ushakov stated that a trilateral summit between Zelensky, Trump, and Putin was not discussed. That is, Moscow does not confirm either the format or its readiness. The Guardian reports Trump will negotiate Ukraine's protection and possible territorial swaps, while Zelensky will discuss meeting readiness and provide guarantee texts within 10 days. Sky News writes that Ukraine will eventually receive security guarantees similar to Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Europe is taking on the main burden. Territorial exchanges are still subject to cancellation. There is no final decision on this issue. As for the situation on the front line, it should be understood that any territorial exchange is legally constrained by the Constitution of Ukraine. That is, there is a clear prohibition on transferring sovereign territory to the aggressor. Politically, it all comes down to the principle of the European Union. Borders cannot be changed by force. Ultimately, it depends on the fortified positions and defensive depth of the armed forces of Ukraine. No one is going to give up these lines of defense that have been built over 11 years of war. In fact, Europeans are clearly saying that if Ukraine signs a deal where it simply gives away Donetsk and Luhansk regions to the dictator Putin, Ukraine will end up with a worse starting position for the next stage of the war. So Ukraine has been building defensive lines for 11 years and now it's losing them, losing politically as well. And accordingly, if there are no clear guarantees, then it's unclear how to defend at all. And that's why the Europeans are pushing for a ceasefire as the first step, rather than Trump's approach of an immediate deal without a ceasefire. This is evident from the quotes of Friedrich, Marx and Macron, who say that a truce is simply vital. And according to Keir Starmer's formula, who clearly says that consequences for Putin must be spelled out. The logic of Trump's pressure is clear from a number of his direct statements in recent days. He stated that a deal needs to be made, Russia is a very big power and Ukraine is not. But the clash of two frameworks is obvious here, because the Europeans say that silence on the front line, then guarantees. Sanctions without territorial exchanges, Trump's position is a deal without a ceasefire and with territorial exchanges. For Kyiv, only the European order is truly safe. And the conclusion I would draw from the past day is this. The United States president has officially raised territorial exchange and the Kremlin promotes it, but decision makers are stalling progress. The law and policy of the European Union, public commitments to security guarantees similar to Article 5 of the NATO Charter, and thirdly, of course, is the military logic, which does not suggest at all that anything should be given to Putin. Any attempt, to sell a territorial exchange under the guise of the price for peace, that's not peace. That's just a pause for the rearmament of the Russian Federation. That is why Europeans are demanding a ceasefire at least by next week and strict guarantees, without any restrictions on the rearmament of the armed forces of Ukraine. Therefore, as you understand, the exchange of territories remains a subject of discussion, not a resolved issue, but a subject of discussion. The Americans are trying to push the idea that there will have to be changes, while the Europeans insist that this should not be a condition for peace. So for now, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.